everybody, and welcome. My name is Melanie Dizon. I'm the Director of Education and Research at the Davis Phinney Foundation, and I am really excited to be here today with Karen Frank, who is not just one of our Parkinson's ambassadors, but she's also a public speaker. She does a lot of work in the world of recovery and trauma and for people with Parkinson's. So thanks so much for being here today, Karen.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? How did you get into this work?
Well, personally, I've been in recovery from substance abuse, honestly, since I was 19 years old. I'm 50 now, so that's a lot of years. I've been sober now for 11 years, but I have not been continuously sober for, all of those years in recovery. So I've experienced lots of different challenges in my life, and some of them have been through sobriety and some of them have not. And, I really have a passion for this. So before I got Parkinson's disease, I was working as a nurse anesthetist, and unable to continue to do that, I really just thought what I was passionate about. So I work with people who struggle with substance abuse in the medical field. And I also use this as an opportunity to reach out to people in the Parkinson's world. So.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's not something that is talked about a whole lot around substance abuse and Parkinson's and sort of what could be challenges for people with Parkinson's that are taking a lot of medication. So I'm excited to talk to you about that and, some advice that you have for people around that. When were you diagnosed with Parkinson's and what was that story like? What was that diagnosis process like for you?
I think initially it was a big shock. In all honesty, in my life, I've had a lot of challenging things happen, and that's part of my recovery story in general. And I had really pulled my life back together from challenges with substance abuse. And suddenly at the age of 47, I was told that I had young onset Parkinson's disease. And, it was just a smackdown initially. And I think one of the guiding grace about it was that I had dug myself out of some really difficult situations in the past. And even though initially I was just like, no, not this. My father had Parkinson's disease as well. So I was not a stranger to that, and he was diagnosed fairly young. But I think that my experience in recovery taught me that you can go through difficult things and you can do that in sobriety. And getting Parkinson's disease diagnosis was really just one among many difficult challenges that I've had to face in my life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm curious to know, just because it seems silly to not talk about it during this time, but when COVID came around, I know I heard a lot of people with Parkinson's that said, oh man, I've been planning for this my whole life. Like the whole time with Parkinson's, like I can do this. How has this experience been for you? Like what have been some of the challenges that you've faced? Not only just, being in recovery, I know that's been a really big issue for a lot of people during COVID to maintain their recovery and that kind of thing, but also, with Parkinson's.
I think when I stopped my work, that was really meaningful to me as a nurse anesthetist, facing the Parkinson's diagnosis at a young age. I was grappling with how I was going to restructure my life and find something meaningful to do and something that really fit with me. And as soon as I was getting engaged with the Davis Phinney Foundation as an ambassador, which I was so grateful to have that opportunity, and I was looking forward to traveling and sharing this message of strength from the foundation with people all across the world, that was exciting to me. Suddenly the pandemic came. And so I was really, I was diagnosed 3 years ago in January, and it took me a good, I would say 7 or 8 months before I got out of that sort of shroud of just the unknown and, depression and anxiety about having to turn my life completely around. But when COVID came, I think you had added challenges of social isolation that people deal with. And at a time in my life where I was losing a lot socially because I was very active in my career among lots of people, and I went to lots of AA meetings, and then suddenly none of those things existed. So I had to try and restructure everything, just like a lot of people have with COVID, and try to find ways to not be isolated, because I think isolation is one of the things that people with substance abuse struggle with in general, whether they're sober or not sober. The part of the fellowship of being in recovery with other people is learning how to, include other people in your life. And that's very hard in the middle of COVID for all of us.
Right. So what are some things that you've done to support your recovery and to, live well with Parkinson's during COVID? What are some adjustments that you've made that have, turned out to be helpful?
I stay involved in my recovery world, whether that's through Zoom or working one-on-one with physicians and nurses who I work with who run into trouble with substance abuse. And I think having a purpose and a message and being able to reach my hand out to someone else and be of service to someone else is a big part of staying well and happy and healthy and living well. Whether that's, reaching my hand out and introducing myself to a new boxer at Rock Steady Boxing, or, taking someone's phone number because they seem like maybe they need a friend and reaching out and calling them. And, I run a support group for young onset Parkinson's disease in my home community. And, we've decided to pull together and we meet weekly instead of monthly. So as a group, we've actually been growing. And I think my comfort in general with support groups through AA has improved my experience with Parkinson's, because the first thing I did was reach out to someone else.
Yeah. So you were just like trained, how beneficial having people in your corner and having people that are traveling a similar path, even though very different circumstances, can help you. So I think that's great. And I think that's, it's not easy for everybody, especially when they get newly diagnosed for whatever reason. Maybe they don't want to share their disease with the public. They're trying to hide it. They don't want people to know. There's that catch-22 of like, I need help, but I don't really want the world to know I have Parkinson's. And it's even more difficult now. In some ways you can be anonymous online when you can show up to things and, not be seen, but kind of observe. But at the same time, you're also a little more open online. Like people can find you and say, oh, this person has Parkinson's. And that's tough for people.
I think, Mel, one of my biggest challenges is, like I said, when I got diagnosed with Parkinson's, it was pretty traumatic. And I had some other traumatic things that happened to me. And so I briefly sort of slipped into this kind of trauma response, which I can talk more about. And I shared with my doctor that I was in recovery, my neurologist, as well as a psychiatrist and anybody else, a therapist who I was seeing. And, I made it very apparent to them that I was worried about side effects of the medications and about compulsive behavior and addictive tendencies, and that staying sober was going to be the key to living well with any condition, Parkinson's, let alone anything else that happens to people. Because even with people who have Parkinson's grapple with other issues, they face challenges in relationships, other challenges with their health. I mean, they're just human. So part of living well, I think, with Parkinson's is to live balanced and not allow something else to creep up. Taking care of your mental health, your physical well-being, your spiritual side, whatever that looks like for different people is different.
Yeah, absolutely. So what would you say? Well, you talked a little bit about, having those experiences before, like you'd been through really difficult experiences, experienced some trauma. And I know that people watching have also gone through really difficult things before they were diagnosed. So what did you take from those experiences, and what did you take from maybe previous therapy or skills that really helped you after those first 7 months when you were just overwhelmed that you decided to really dig in?
Well, I'll mention a little bit about trauma history because I think people don't talk about it. I'm not the only person who's experienced these things. Right. Different trauma is different for everyone. Some people, when I was younger, I was sexually assaulted, and I bring that up because there are many women and men who've dealt with that challenge. And I was set up I was prone to addiction because, genetically in my family, it's very strong. And I think that early experience of trauma, and I had some other things that had happened, a series of blows in my life. I was a witness to gun violence, which unfortunately in this country I'm not the only one there either. And, kids have to go to school every day now afraid and doing drills for things. I mean, trauma is embedded in our society. We see it on the news every day. And it's not just something that happens to other people. We're all affected by experiences in life. Now, I don't remember what your initial question was, but part of what I think about as trauma is I used to be a gymnast. And when you're in gymnastics, I think about the vault. I think most people have seen some gymnastics, and there's a springboard and you run as fast as you can down this long line and you jump on that springboard, and if you jump on it wrong and your ankle's twisted to the side, you're going to fly off to the side. If you jump on it right, you're going to launch beautifully onto the vault and you're going to do this amazing maneuver and you're going to land on your feet, hopefully, when all is said and done, and you're going to put your arms up in victory and be like, wow, I made this beautiful thing. And I think trauma is that springboard. Some people don't launch off into the beautiful vault. And I think a lot of my life, I launched off and like face planted into a wall. And that was addiction and substance abuse for me and poor coping skills. But when I was really able to get to the root of what was hurting on the inside that made me turn to substances to begin with and actually heal that and understand that I am not those things that happened to me, that my life was actually better and more beautiful and more full and more rich because of these experiences. That's not easy to do, but I think part of that is healing. It's sort of a wound that heals. You always have a little scar there, but it's not a scab that you keep picking off. But I think addiction is the human condition. It's difficult, and getting Parkinson's, I didn't pick it. It wasn't something I thought was going to happen. In fact, I had overcome so many challenges, and then all of a sudden, I was feeling pretty good about life. And then I was like, what? Parkinson's? Really? That wasn't in the plan.
Yeah.
But I think that by being present and being real and understanding that I can do difficult things. I've done it before, and this is no different.
Right.
Yeah.
How has having Parkinson's interplayed with?
Hold on, there's some barking in the background. 1 second. Can you repeat your question?
Yeah. Let me. Okay. So how has getting Parkinson's interplayed with your recovery and your addiction?
Well, some people are familiar with side effects of the medications, and especially dopamine agonists, I think, are famous for this. And, this is by no means medical advice. This is just sharing my own experience with this. I took a dopamine agonist, the patch that you wear, and I developed some really compulsive behavior. It was hard to recognize that it was happening. I started shopping a lot. I'm not a big shopper. I didn't have a lot of clothes because I wore scrubs for my career. And so I just convinced myself that I was just like buying clothes, that I needed a wardrobe now because I wasn't wearing scrubs as much. And I realized I had a stack of receipts like this high, one over the next. And I was shopping and returning things and shopping and returning things. And I was eating compulsively, which I'd never really had an issue with before. Luckily, I didn't want to drink or anything, but I was pretty mindful of this. And I quickly went to my doctor and told them what was happening. And they decided that it would be in my best interest not to be on that medication. That if I was prone to addictive and compulsive behavior, which is one of the known side effects of all dopamine-based therapies, but particularly those, that it probably was not going to be good. So my doctor did take me off those medications and tried something different. And he suggested, which I thought was really helpful, to go to a cognitive behavioral therapist and learn a very specific skill set for managing anxiety. And he kept thinking I was anxious, and I kept saying, I'm not anxious. But I think looking back on it, hindsight is 20/20. I think I was very anxious, and I couldn't recognize that in myself. And after I took his advice, my neurologist said, go to a cognitive behavioral therapist. And I really learned what was involved in this kind of behavior. And learn some new skills and tools. I think that was very helpful for me.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
if you're prone to addictive behavior, you should tell your doctor at least so they know to help you keep an eye on it.
Yeah, so that's a question that I wanted to dig a little bit deeper. So you obviously had a doctor that you trusted, and did you have a neurologist or a movement disorder specialist?
I did.
Okay. And then it sounds like you also were working with a psychiatrist.
Yes.
Okay. So when did you get those people on your team, and are they all communicating with each other? And when you went to your doctor, was like, oh, well, talk to your, whoever deals with your meds or that kind of thing.
Well, I had already been seeing a psychiatrist who was an addictionologist, and that's a psychiatrist who specializes in the subject of addiction, helping people with that. Um, I actually remember before I got diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, I was crying a lot. And I wasn't sad. I just was crying a lot. I was having a lot of anxiety in the workplace, severe anxiety. And that was not typical for me. And I worked in the operating room doing anesthesia. I mean, it was pretty hard. I would get very anxious and something would happen and then I wouldn't know what to do. I would freeze. And so I had gone to the psychiatrist to ask about anxiety. I mean, not realizing it probably was Parkinson's at the time. Then I presented with motor symptoms and a tremor was the first stiffness, but I didn't recognize that as anything. I mean, I thought I was just middle-aged and that's what happens in your 40s or 50s or whatever. So when I developed a tremor and I sought care from a neurologist, my internist just sent me straight to a movement disorder doctor. My father had had Parkinson's, and we actually see the same doctor. I mean, he struggled with Parkinson's for 22 years. And at that time, Dr. Perlmutter, my doctor, was a fellow, and now he's, a senior attending and everything. And I worked at the same institution, the same university. So I reached out to him and told him that I thought I might have Parkinson's disease. So, he's very mindful of my recovery. And, I always am very forthright with my physicians about being sober. I think that's important. Unfortunately, this has nothing to do with addiction, but I fell a couple weeks ago. I fell down the steps and I fractured my ankle. So right now, I was in a lot of pain and I needed pain medication, but I need to always say to the doctor, listen, I'm in recovery. I haven't had a drink in 11 years. And it was funny because in the ambulance on the way to the hospital, I said something and he's like, oh, well, we don't have to give you anything for pain. And I was like, no, I'm in pain. I was like, I want something, but I need you to know.
Right.
Don't give me, I need you to know.
Yeah.
And the same thing with Parkinson's, these medications are strong. They have powerful effect on people. And if, the worst thing I could do is to lose my sobriety.
Right.
That'll make any situation I'm in much worse.
Yeah. So what have you heard from other people in the Parkinson's community around their addiction issues? Is that something that's come up a lot?
I have heard quite a bit from various people in different situations. I've known others who had trouble with the medications, with compulsive behavior. Some have talked about hypersexuality and sexual addiction issues. People who definitely were eating quite a bit or gambling. I don't know about drugs or alcohol in particular, but I've heard more about those other behaviors. People who never had something like that, and then all of a sudden they were engaging in very risky and strange behavior for them. And I think one of the hallmarks, what I notice in people is often someone's not really aware of their own, they lack insight into their own behavior. But someone else, like a spouse, might say, yeah, she's shopping all the time, or she's eating nonstop, or, whatever it is. People can get into some really bad trouble with things like compulsive impulse control issues. And so if you are having any signs of trouble with any of these things, you really need to be forthright with your doctor and probably have a discussion with your care partner, whether it's a family member or a spouse or a friend or a nurse, to keep an eye out for this in you, because you may not recognize it yourself. Like even
Right.
in my own situation, all this experience with addictive behavior, and I at first did not realize that this shopping I was doing was not normal.
Yeah. One of the things that I talked about a bunch with movement disorder specialists or others who specialize in impulse control disorders is that there can be a tough balance to strike, because if you need the dopamine agonist for whatever reason, and it really, really does help you, but you also get an impulse control disorder, it's like you're making a choice. You're saying, do I want this or that? It was really interesting. One time I was talking to a couple who the gentleman had increased interest in pornography, and he was watching it all of the time, and it was never something that was part of their life. But after he started taking the dopamine agonist, it was. And they made the conscious choice to say, when they tried to titrate him lower or to take it off the dopamine agonist, he was miserable and it was awful. And they decided, I would rather you be watching porn and, doing what you need to do than not experiencing the really bad symptoms of Parkinson's that he was experiencing. Now, I've heard other cases where marriages have been destroyed because somebody spent all the money, right? And they were gambling and gambled their life savings away. So it is a highly dangerous situation. And if you don't get help, it can be a really big problem. I'm wondering if some of the strategies that people are using for addiction to substance abuse, alcohol, et cetera, will work for those other issues without having to take them off dopamine agonists if they don't want to go off of them, right? But I'm curious if that's a big conversation in the Parkinson's world.
I think it is a big conversation in the Parkinson's world because, I'm not a physician, so I'm quoting this number, not from science necessarily, but I've heard around 19-20% of people who take these drugs develop some sort of impulse control problem. And I can tell you for myself, I've had to deal with impulse control issues my entire life. And for me, I know I'm going to be taking dopamine based medications forever. I have Parkinson's, that's not changing. So I need to learn how to live with it. But I've had to do that, all along in recovery. And I'm blessed in a way that I have learned how to live that way and to fight that urge, or compulsion to drink, for example. But it doesn't make me automatically knowledgeable all the time about how to deal with things. Because for me, I've had impulse control issues now on the dopamine medications with food. That's never was an issue for me before. In fact, I'll just share personally, I'm going in a month to see a specialist in this therapist who specializes in disordered eating to try and get a handle on this before it becomes a real problem for me. Right now I'm just a little pudgy and I put on a little bit of weight, but I recognize that you can't let the train run off the tracks indefinitely. But I went to Japan last summer to the World Parkinson's Congress, and I sat on a roundtable discussion with young people from all around the world. And there was a gentleman who had run into a lot of trouble with sleeping with prostitutes, and it had just wreaked havoc upon his marriage. His wife was still with him, but what he described about this inability to stop this behavior and just the dopamine medications had just a grip on him that was so tight. But for myself, I know that dopamine has always been involved in my life. I'm wearing a necklace right now. This is dopamine, the molecule. But dopamine is the happiness chemical, the addiction chemical. You get dopamine release when you do things that you really love, like skiing is a healthy thing that makes me release dopamine. So I try to ski still. I don't live in the mountains, so I can do it in a limited amount of time. But taking a drink would release dopamine too. And dopamine was at the crux of my problems with alcohol. And now it's at the crux of my problems with Parkinson's. So all the crazy, life I lived, I never got a tattoo, but if I was going to get one tattoo, it would be dopamine. Definitely.
Well, one of the threads that keeps going through everything that you're talking about is this bias toward action, which is a really big thing for the Davis Phinney Foundation. We always say that living well isn't just something that happens to you, right? You have to take action every day. And so it sounds to me like, you've been doing that. You've done that in your life. You've done that with your recovery. You've done that with, right now you just said you're having some issues with eating and you already have a plan to do it. So what do you think is different about you that you're willing to go do whatever it takes, and you see a problem and you take action, and that you're going to look on the positive side of things that's different from other people, that you come in contact with? And what are the things that you try to teach them so that they can, really live well despite having not just Parkinson's, but maybe some other issues as well?
Well, I think having battled addiction and substance abuse at the very worst times, there was a lot about my life that was not a life that I would be proud of, a life I would live like I do today. And, there came a point at which I had to make a choice, get busy dying or get busy living, or what's that?
Yep.
Get busy living or get busy dying. And I mean, addiction and alcoholism and that's death. That is not living. Living is finding the joy and gratitude in every day. Living is helping other people and not being so consumed with your own problems that you just feel sorry for yourself. Pour me, pour me, pour me another drink. And I think reaching out to others, letting them know that you've been there and you know what it feels like, but you'll be there and help them to feel better, just like, someone was hopefully there for you. But I think what's different about me, I must be pretty strong, because I think all of the things that I've been through, I came pretty close to losing hope, but I always had that glimmer of hope. And it reminds me of my favorite book. It's called The Prophet by this Lebanese poet named Khalil Gibran. And my favorite quote in the book is this: "It's the deeper that sorrow carves into your being, the more joy you can contain."
That's
and, for me, I had a pretty big goblet, a huge cup with a lot of depth of sorrow. And, coming through that and knowing that I can fill that up with joy, that's a choice, that's a choice I make every day. And I will continue to make. And it's really just a daily reprieve, and I'm sure Parkinson's is going to get harder. That I know. And I will have to rely on those skills and tools that I've learned in my strongest moments to get through that, because it isn't all going to be easy.
Right. One of the things that I wanted to bring up, because it was one of the funniest stories that you told me, was that I think it was the day that may not have been the day that you were diagnosed, but your husband was talking and you were crying and you were just so upset and you're on the floor, right? And just snot and crying and just awful. And he sat down with you and said, when are you going to stop crying? And you were like, maybe 10 minutes, right? And it's funny, but it's also true. Like as a former therapist, what I used to say was, block out some time for yourself to cry. Say, okay, I get to complain, or I get to say how awful everything is for 10 minutes, and then I'm going to move on. And that's sort of, what you did. And you were able to find that levity, and that 10 minutes, okay, this is what am I just going to keep crying the rest of my life?
I think he knew he has a really great sense of humor and a way to reach me when I'm really not feeling like things are very funny. Yeah. And I think he just knew it was time to finally say, all right, it's been long enough. And, it really did strike me as funny, because I know he wasn't asking me literally in 10 minutes, are you going to stop crying? But that was a pivotal moment. That was a moment where I just looked up and it was a really ugly cry. It was bad. And I was snot all over the place. And I'm and I looked at him and I was like, now, and I wiped off my tears, and, that was the last major cry I
Wow.
had. That was probably 27 months ago. Not
Wow.
that I haven't had a bad day. I have a few boo-hoos here and there, but for the most part, I'm like, what's next? What now?
Yeah. Well, that's one of the reasons we love having you as an ambassador. I mean, you're very positive and very, willing to help people, but also, you're going to tell them like it is. You're not going to pretend that it's not difficult or that it's not tough, but you have some skills that you can practice to get through the days.
Hmm.
So thank you so much for doing this with us today. I know it's going to be super helpful for people. I don't think it's a conversation that many people have. I think it's important to talk about it. I think it's important for people to realize like this is something to share with your doctor. And unfortunately, not everyone's feels like they're educated enough on the side effects of some of the drugs. I think that's a real issue because if there's no anticipation of something that might happen, then you could be really unsure. Like you just really aren't seeing it in yourself and no one's looking out for it. No one's like, oh, that's right. I heard this could happen. And it could get too far down the lane before you are able to catch it and fix it. So
I think some of it is about the drugs and side effects, but there's also just like I was saying about being human. I mean, people develop problem with alcohol for all kinds of reasons. And in a neurologic disease, which we know causes problems with sleep, disordered behavior, with anxiety, depression, other neuropsychiatric problems that go along with Parkinson's disease, and the stress of having a chronic illness, which is progressive and deteriorates over time. I mean, people can develop substance abuse problems just because they drink too much to cope. It's not all just the meds. And, just like if you had another condition like high blood pressure and Parkinson's, you take blood pressure medicine. So, my biggest encouragement is if you find you have some sort of disordered addictive behavior, whether that's drugs or alcohol or any other thing, whatever the cause, whether it's linked to medications or just linked to a concurrent problem, you do need help.
yeah,
Whether you find that in the community with professionals, and most likely you're going to need help from your immediate support group, your doctors, a professional, AA.
yeah.
There are plenty of people that have gone to AA for all kinds of compulsive problems because it works.
Yeah. It's been around a long time because it works.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I'll definitely put your contact info on the link so that people can reach out to you if they want to talk about this or anything else related to Parkinson's. I know you're there to help them out. So thank you so much for being here and we'll talk again soon.
Okay. Thanks, Melanie.